Now we're going to build a pretty simple template. So what we first need to do is import React from React. And we're also going to import in GraphQL from Gatsby because we need to make a request for the actual markdown. We're also going to import the layout from our components. Now, if you're curious why this template is not in our components folder, the reason is because this template is not a component that we actually use in the application. Any application files we keep inside of our components, but anything that we use to actually build out our blog posts or any other templates that we dynamically generate in our Gatsby node, we're just going to put here instead. What we're going to export as the default is going to be this new function where we get the data, because we know what we're going to want to pluck off is the markdown. The actual GraphQL that we need is going to be this query. Now, what we want to query for is the individual markdown remark related to the slug that we get. We're actually going to get that slug manually by passing in it as a parameter that our GraphQL will use. So I'm going to show you what the GraphQL looks like, and then when we go back to our Gatsby Node.js, you're going to see how we pass that in. So essentially, we're going to have our query, and it's going to receive this parameter called slug that's going to be a string, and it's always going to be mandatory. Now, what we're going to get back is a markdown remark, where what we're looking for is we want to match this fields here to the slug value, right? And we want it to be equal to the slug parameter that we pass in. So if you're unfamiliar with GraphQL, this is the syntax of writing a query. Essentially, we're specifying that I want you to match this field on our markdown remark where the slug is equivalent to this slug string that we pass in here. Now we can actually test to see if this query works first. And we can do it inside of our GraphQL playground. So let's just get rid of our initial query for all markdown remarks. And what we're going to request for is simply a markdown remark. And inside here, we see that what we did was we checked for the fields, we checked for the slug, and we checked that it was equal to some string. So in this case, the string that we're matching will be either ice cream or my first blog. And now, whenever this logs, I also want to make sure that I get the ID, and I want the fields as well, and I also want the slug here. So now if I do this, I see that I'm fetching for exactly the markdown that matched the ice cream slug to this string, which was our ice cream markdown. So that's really what we're doing here. So what we're doing is we are getting that markdown, and what we want to plug off of it is the HTML. We want the front matter, and we want the title. So with this, we now have the data that we need. And what we're going to do is we are going to set the post itself equal to data.markdownRemark. So now we have access to the markdown remark object. And what we're going to return is our layout component wrapping around some div that holds inside of it an H2 or an H1. Let's do an H1 actually. And as you can guess, we're going to do post.frontmatter.title. And then for a div, this is where we're actually going to populate the div with our HTML. So we're going to use a React method called dangerously set inner HTML. This is the preferred way of actually setting this value. So I know it says dangerously set. This is because in typical React, you don't want to do this, but in Gatsby, this is perfectly fine because it's not dynamically generated. This is statically set. So underscore HTML is the value, and we want post.html. So we want to use the HTML value here. And what this will do is this will set all of the HTML value inside of this div. So with this, we have our blog post template. So let's go back to our Gatsby Node.js file. And inside of our create pages that we had before, we are going to now pass the component. Now, this component is expecting a relative path. So we actually have to build it using the path variable that we get by default from the path library that comes with every single Node.js file. So we're going to pass in path, and we're going to say path.resolve. And what we're going to say is ./source. So I want to go from the root down to the source folder into templates using our blog.js. Now, in order for us to pass the actual slug value to this query, we pass it through this context object. And here we're going to give the slug equal to our node.fields.slug. So now this will know that when it runs create pages, what it's going to do is it's going to create the page calling GraphQL using every single markdown remark. It's going to loop through every single markdown file that we have, and it's going to manually create a new page for it using that new blog post template. But now we have our new create pages method. There's actually a typo here. This actually should be S. In fact, let's just double check our blog post to make sure that we're not doing anything wrong. Oh, it looks like I actually used the wrong parentheses here. So let's just fix that as well. We want to make sure we're returning with round brackets. Okay. So now let's restart our server. So let's just wait for our server to finish building. Okay. So now that we're finished building, let's actually see if our pages have generated. So let's go to localhost 8000 and let's just navigate to our pages. So the first is ice cream, and we see that we have it. And our second is my first AMA. And here we see that this also works. So we now have our dynamically built pages using our markdowns. If we write any new markdowns to our pages, not only is it going to add to our index, but we're going to generate a new page for it. So this is awesome because now we've pretty much got a dynamically structured and building blog without us having to add any more code other than some styling if we want to or new features. But as far as it goes in terms of adding new blog posts, this is pretty much done. One other thing that we're going to do is we actually probably should reverse the order of this listing, because right now it's listing the earliest dates first versus listing the latest dates as the newest things. So we can do all this in the next lesson.